let's now talk about another sector which is highly regulated, telecom. March will see a lot of auctions of 800, 900 megahertz. Vodafone, Airtel have also filed petitions at the Delhi High Court. What do you think of, what does the future hold for this sector? Do you see major disruption of operations because these guys are threatening that, if their licenses are not continued?
I don't think they'll pull the plug. That's been the unsaid threat for a long time. When this whole refarming thing came up, and all the cellular operators got together and then they briefed the media. They had these conferences. They met editors separately and tried to tell them their side of the story. And there was this number which they put forth saying there'll be 100 to 150 million people who will be blacked out.
Right.
I'm not so sure that's going to happen. Right? That's like an extreme measure. But the fact is, the uncertainty surrounding this sector hasn't gone away. Typically, when you have an auction, when you have policy, and as these policies get implemented and become specific actions, there's more clarity that comes into a sector. And the unfortunate thing in telecom is that it hasn't. And the reason for that, I think,
is only building up.
Yeah, I think the government is still trying to get its hands around this. The first auction process which happened last year was a complete flop. And now there's the re-auction, and then there's the auction for spectrum in a different bandwidth. I'm not so sure how much of this will succeed. They really need to sit down with the operators, understand, and also sit down with experts who are not operators, which means, they need to get the business perspective. They also need to get the consumer perspective. They need to look at the competitive perspective and maybe tweak the policy. To my mind, I believe that the government is sort of looking at the courts with a very, very nervous eye.
Absolutely.
And sort of deciding what to do based on how it fears the court will act.
I guess they're more scared of taking...
Exactly, and I don't think that's the right way to do this, because you have to do the right thing by the sector. And we've said this all along, because auctions are a good way of finding an effective price and all that. But you'll have to decide what you want to do with that money. Here you're going to use that money to sort of, to sort of balance your books. Not such a great thing to do. It has to be plowed back into the sector in some significant way. And of course, there's also the radical theory, and it's a fact, that in many markets, auctions have been found counterproductive. Right? In the US, for instance, in 1999, 2000, when they first auctioned third generation telecommunications services and licenses for that and spectrum for that, companies bid irrational amounts, almost went bankrupt, and 10 months later they had to re-auction just to make sure that the sector was healthy and growth happened. You look at 3G. What kind of 3G services do we have? I'm on 3G. I think my data transfer speeds were faster when I was on edge. Right, so clearly,
all the build-up has not really materialized.
What kind of applications do we have on 3G? I can't think of a dozen. Yeah, I can't think of a dozen interesting applications that we have on 3G, and everyone keeps speaking of how it's data rich and you'll be able to do all sorts of things. What sorts of things? These guys don't have the money to invest in anything. You haven't moved it forward in any significant way. So I think these are the kind of issues that they need to look at. You look at every single telecom company loaded with debt.
Sure.
Of course, some like Bharti are also loaded with debt because it made its acquisition. But I've always been a contrarian. I've always held the view that the acquisition is a good thing for Bharti from the long-term perspective. May not be so great from the short-term perspective that most analysts and the stock market seems to have. But I think if you look at the 10-year perspective, I think it's a good thing. But that's it. All of them are loaded with debt. You have to find a way out for them. This is a sector... it's very interesting. This sector was in its prime between 2004 and 2008, right? And since then, it's been a steady trek downhill for them.
I also wanted to touch upon this BWA, auction. People they're saying that people who have BWA license can now also, launch voice, etc. How will that impact, the future auctions? Because it's sort of, competing in the same market. Somebody who has a BWA license can offer voice.
We always, keep making these changes, right? And this then the telecom policy hinted at this, and then we mentioned the fact that they might do this, and this was what, a year ago, year and a half ago, and then they've finally gone out and the Telecom Commission has recommended that this be done. And I think we don't have any fixed regulation. We've allowed the lines to be blurred, which is fine, and I just find it very surprising that they are so keen to do this, because the rest of the world is moving from voice to data, right? So it's guys who are doing this who will now want to do that, right? Voice to data. Here you have companies that are doing data, or which will do data, because we haven't seen the light of those services, but which will do data, which will also want to do voice, right? And the voice market is already crowded, and now the re-auction, because they want to go back to that 2008 kind of situation. There's no cap on the number of telecom operators that they'll give. The only cap is a physical infrastructure cap, which is put there by Spectrum, but otherwise there's no cap, there's no ceiling. You must remember, in originally when the licenses were first given out, it was just 2 per circle, right? And then you had the state-owned operators, and then they made it 4 per circle. And then of course it grew, and they made it like, in some markets you had 13, and then it shrunk again after the Supreme Court ruling cancelling some of the licenses that were given out. So I don't know why you would want to do that, because it will cut into revenues per user, it will cut into profitability, it will do the kind of things that it shouldn't do. Well, what's your objective as a government? Your objective as a government is to view this whole thing as an infrastructure for economic advancement, right? Much like the railroad was, much like the telegraph was. In India, mobile telephony is exactly that kind of infrastructure, which can have a positive impact on the country's gross domestic product. And so you will have to look at what kind of apps need to be offered. You'll have to look at maybe what kind of subsidies need to be offered. Some of this license fee and other things need to be plowed back to make it viable for. Have you created an ecosystem where people are looking at services that people in that customers in rural areas want to use, which can integrate them into the mainstream of this country's economy? I don't think the thinking is happening at that level at all. It's happening at the level of how much money can we make. Can we allow party A to offer services that he or she was originally not allowed to offer? And some of these decisions are obviously taken on the basis of lobbying, right? It's not taken because someone's making a mistake. I just think there's influence being exerted, and the government is bending in some cases. So I don't see the logic behind this. So someone will have to explain it to us, I guess.
So I guess the initial objective of mobile connectivity is sort of met, with the penetration levels we have.
Exactly.
You need to just focus on internet and, like you said, the services.
And anyway, you look at it this way: if you're offering broadband wireless access, you'll anyway be able to do VoIP and Skype and all those things, right? Why are you getting into this voice aspect of the business? Because anyway, you can make voice calls. Like I can make voice calls with my tablet, right? If I have Skype, I can call anyone anywhere in the world, which is allowed. So I don't know what
the lines are blurring, and they need to be more clear about what's the way forward.